evening. How are you?
Good evening.
We're going to get introduced to them.
I wonder.
Well, we have to give our consent.
We do.
Good evening, everyone. Is there anyone here from the Ministerial Alliance? If not, Matthew, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to start the meeting moving up one item, consent agenda, in an effort to give Ward 1 citizens full representation. I would like to fill the vacancy that resulted from Daniel Jones resigning here a couple of weeks ago. So with your advice and consent, I would like to appoint Monty Jordan to fill that 6-month period. Are there any questions? Yes, Rachel.
So one question I have is sort of what was the process for sort of deciding on Mr. Jordan? I mean, I'm very familiar with the fact that he's been on city council before, but sort of considering that he actually was rejected by the voters in the last election and under which he ran, I was wondering why that would make him a good candidate.
Okay. David, do you have a different question or same question?
Similar question and a little bit of a statement, but yeah.
Okay, well, you want to ask it and then I'll answer them both at the same time?
Mine's not a question really, so no.
Okay. All right, so 2 reasons. Number one, when we run for elected office, we all fill an affidavit. That is to verify our eligibility to be placed on the ballot. Daniel, like the rest of us, filled one of those out. And it's, whether it's evident or not, I don't know, because the process didn't work its way through, but it's not likely that he would have been eligible to be on the ballot. So I think the fair thing is to then default to who he was running against. In this case, there was only one person, which was Monty. That's the first reason. Second reason is Monty has at least 7 elections, so 14 years of experience. Monty has been active through all the discussions and decisions regarding community improvement districts, TIF 1, TIF 2, TDDs, time on planning and zoning, so on and so forth. So he is extremely well qualified, and I think there would be no reason or no hesitation for me to ask for that appointment. Yes.
I just have a little bit of a statement or discussion, I guess, if that's okay for something like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for me, I feel like that we as elected officials are, similarly to what Rachel said, accountable to the voters. And I feel it's important to listen to the voters at times such as these. I want to be clear that I mean no disrespect for Mr. Jordan, who has clearly dedicated much time and service on our council and in our community in many other ways. But the people voted for someone who would be engaged, go above and beyond, looked out for the least among us, the socioeconomically disadvantaged, support community collaboration, solve problems of the drug and opioid addiction and homelessness, support our police officers and CIT, dive deeper into zoning issues, and help in the greening of our city. While I understand it's the mayor's prerogative and job to appoint this seat, I understand that this person will not likely look like the last person in the seat. But I believe it should at least be a fresh voice, as that is what the voters asked for.
Can I ask him a question?
Go ahead.
What do you mean by greening of the city?
Tree City,
Okay.
coming up with more ways to, green our downtown in terms of trees and that kind of thing.
Okay, so let me put it to you this way. Monty Jordan's got more experience and a deeper resume than half of you on the council put together. So I think we should be damn lucky and damn happy that he's willing to sit in that position and represent that ward for the next 6 months. After that, it's a ward decision. I'm not looking for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I'm appointing somebody for for 6 months, and then the citizens of Ward 4 can make their decision. That's the first thing. Second of all, and I'm looking at Andrew and hope he's not going to write this, but frankly speaking, I think we have grossly overstated the accomplishments of Mr. Jones. That's in the eye of the beholder. That's fine. You believe what you want to believe. I'll believe in what I want to believe. But I think this council can use some balance. It's a good thing when you've got experience and people in transition experience and people that have just come on council. I think we can serve our collective decision-making better with having another experienced person, somebody that has been through this ranks before. Ward 1 could decide in April who they want.
I respect that opinion. I just personally feel that,
I'll add one more thing.
Yeah.
I think this is a Ward 1 decision, and I think for those of you that are so interested in Ward 1, I think you should worry about your own divisions, your own wards.
well, the reason I care about Ward 1 is I do live very close to it. I'm only a block away from it. And I also know that it is kind of an underrepresented ward just in terms of it has some issues in terms of some of the zoning things. It has some drug issues in the past and those kinds of things. And the reason I keyed into some of the issues that Mr. Jones did himself support were issues that were really seriously important, not just all of us as Rolla, but as some of the heart of some of the difficult issues that we're facing. And I think that's where I'm trying to say that I think it does make sense that we look at those ideas as, I understand a deep resume and I also understand someone who's been here a long time before, but I also think it's important to have folks that see those issues because I think those are the reasons that the Ward 1 voters chose that decision, because they saw that there was someone that was engaged in those specific issues that honestly in Ward 1 sometimes are a little different than in Ward 4 or Ward 3. There's some different things going on there. So
I'll give you that. One of my responsibilities is I don't make the laws. I am required to follow the laws and the policies that you set out. Election laws are very important. So one of the things as I sit and read articles like this stupid bunch of people here that wrote is if a person's not eligible to be on council, for whatever reason, that has to be dealt with. So we can't look backward at Mr. Jones and why he got elected and why he didn't get elected. I'm not in Ward 1. All I'm about to say is I got a 6-month vacancy. I have somebody there that has a total of 1 year on the job in Ward 1, and I think it's a good thing for that person to be sitting next to somebody that's got 14 years of experience. That's the perspective I come from. So I got your advice. Now I vote on your consent. Is there a motion to appoint Monty Jordan to fill the unexpired term?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made in second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
2 noes? Show the hands. 3 noes. Let the record show 3 noes. 3 noes. Christine, Rachel, and Nick. David. 3. You want to administer the office, or the oath of office?
Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
That I will support the Constitution of the United States
and of the state of Missouri,
and the
Moving on, we have two public hearings tonight. One is an ordinance rezoning property at 1701 Farrar Drive. Tom? Do what?
This is an application from J&R Property Services LLC, care of Rong Chen. The request is to rezone from the R2 two-family district to the R3 multifamily district. Property is located at the corners of 18th Street, Farrar Drive, and Missouri Avenue. It fronts on 3 streets. The property, as you can see, it has one building on it. That building is a duplex. This is a zoning map, just to give you an idea of the surrounding zoning. The entire area south of 18th is zoned R2, the two-family district. But you notice across the street on the north side of 18th, notice is primarily zoned R3, the multifamily district. Future land use plan does indicate that the properties south of 18th Street are appropriate for lower density residential uses. But notice it does also indicate that some properties on the other, directly on the other side of the street would be appropriate for low to medium density residential type uses. This is a street view of the property from Google. This is taken a few years ago. The building, since this picture was taken, has been deeply neglected and probably isn't worth saving at this point. The applicant can testify to a little bit more of that if needed. This is a summary. The request to be consistent with the adjacent current and future land uses across the street on 18th. A strict view, as you saw, the future land use plan had 18th as kind of a divider, but this property fronts on 18th, the same as the other properties front on 18th. So I'd say it's consistent with that at least. It does have frontage on an arterial road, that's 18th Street, which is a little unusual. It's not a local street. The area is pretty neglected. This building and another building the applicant bought and was approved for a variance to build a duplex were both had been very neglected, and there are other properties in the immediate vicinity that are very neglected. At this time, no plans have been submitted, but with this zoning, if it were to be approved, they could build up to 4 units on the property. The Planning Commission did hear this request last week, and they did vote 7-0 to recommend approval of the request. Do you have any questions for me before we move to public hearing?
Any questions for Tom?
I see one, and then another.
Rachel?
Let's start.
So one question that I have, thinking about some of the stuff that is in the rest of the packet here, when you're saying it's 4 units, sort of 4 separate units, I guess then there's no sense of like what the height would look like, or since we don't really, I think, have any sort of like.
Right, the applicant didn't talk a little bit about what they have in mind, but 4 units, that'd be an apartment building, that 4, like not 4 separate houses or something like that.
Okay.
And the R3 district, I believe it allows for basically what you think of as 3 stories at the very maximum. I don't remember the number of feet that would be.
Yeah, but with if it were like a 3-floor maximum, how would that fit in? Especially thinking about how we're kind of planning to go back and sort of talk about sort of the neighborhood development and do a more kind of rigorous sort of community plan for that area.
Until that discussion has happened, it's hard to answer how it would really fit in.
Yeah.
David?
Yes.
Just a couple questions. So it's 2 lots right now, is that right?
2 platted lots, yes.
So at the current R2, if the folks wanted to do R2, could they do an R2 construction on each one of the separate lots separately?
Not without a variance.
Because of the size of the lots and stuff
Correct.
like that, okay. So this is allowing them, the R3, which the reason they can only do 4 units also has to do with the size of that full lot
Yes.
once it's done.
Yes.
Okay, and the only way we'd end up with something like, I guess what Rachel's saying is if for some reason they bought lots next to those and grew that, they'd have to get that changed to an R3 too, I guess, to also do more than 4.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is the 1307, is that an occupied house? I was kind of looking at Google Maps earlier. I mean, that's pretty close to the property line there.
The one next to it here? I think it was. Some houses are kind of hard to tell in that neighborhood, but it looked to me like it probably is occupied.
It just seems, I don't know, to think about like Rachel mentioned, something tall hovering over a house that close to the property line. It would
You
seem
also
to
to
be
remember the
concern.
setback on that side. It would only be 5 feet in that zoning district. I believe that's a little further than what the existing house is currently, but that still is pretty close. That's true.
This one's closer than 5 feet from the property line?
It looks like it.
It's,
could be.
I
Just
drove by
when you
there
go and
the
look at
other
it,
day.
it looks like it's about 3 feet when you
It,
look at
it
fences
is
and
very
things like that.
close.
There's no, Matthew?
So do these neighbors that live there, do they know about this? I mean, I know there's signs posted, but have we heard from them?
I have not heard from them. Signs are posted. We do send letters to the property owner, so I don't know if it's a rental unit or not. We do send letters to the property owners and notices posted in the newspaper. I did not hear from
So we
the
sent a letter to the property owner or the renters?
property owner. This is a kind of a good segue. You'll notice in your packet there's a something that looks a little different than you might be used to. There's a map, and then on the back of it, kind of frequently asked questions. Actually, is the letter that was sent to the neighborhood. You notice it's quite different from what has been sent in the past, and I hope everybody likes it, and I hope that leads to better
I think this is
understanding. in the
very,
future.
very helpful.
Yes.
As a
Yes.
person that's going to get this in the mail, this really tells them something.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
compliments.
But I'll be including at least the first page. You might not need the frequently asked questions every time, but at least the first page with your packets from now on, so you'll be able to see what they got, but also it doubles as an area map and just kind of a helpful all-in-one explanation of what this is.
No, nice. Okay, we'll circle back to council comments. I'd like to officially open the public hearing. Is there anyone that owns property within 185 feet of this proposed zoning that would like to speak for the proposed rezoning? Is there anybody that owns property within 185 feet of this proposed rezoning that would like to speak against the rezoning? Is there anyone that owns property outside of the 185 feet of this property that would like to speak for the rezoning? Is there anyone that owns property outside of the 185 feet of this proposed rezoning that would like to speak against the proposed rezoning? If not, this closes the public hearing. Councilpersons, any other questions? May we have the first reading?
An ordinance to approve the rezoning of Block 1, Lots 1 and 2, Frisco subdivision, AKA 1701 Farrar Drive, from R2 to Family District zoning to the R3 Multifamily District zoning.
The next public hearing is regarding proposed amendments to Section 4229 of the code pertaining to sidewalks. Tom, I have a request on this one.
Okay?
Some of us have had endless conversations over the years about sidewalks, but there's a lot of council here that hasn't. So when you go through this one, can you compare and contrast what we have today versus the proposed? So instead of just going through here and saying this is what proposed, if you can give the newer council people context.
Okay, we can
Okay.
try. This is a request for a text amendment. This is brought forth by the City of Rolla. This would be to change sections 42-29 and add sections 42-33 and 42-233.1. So the proposed amendment, what it would do, it would clarify when sidewalks are and are not needed. Right now, basically, the code says says 4-foot sidewalk anytime you subdivide property, and so there are many situations where you may want sidewalks on certain streets, and maybe you don't need them on certain other streets. So it sort of clarifies that a little bit more. It clarifies what the width of sidewalks must be built. Currently, the code just says 4 feet. The sidewalk standards were recently changed to require 5 feet, but then right now there's a difference between the standards and what is in the ordinance. So this would clarify that there'd be a minimum 5 foot required in certain circumstances, but there are some circumstances where you still need a wider sidewalk. So this would be like in a commercial district, you might need a little bit wider of a sidewalk. Next to a state highway, you might want a little bit wider of a sidewalk. Downtown, might want a little bit wider of a sidewalk. Those types of situations. It also requires that sidewalks be built with development and redevelopment in addition to when property is subdivided. Because currently the only trigger is when property is subdivided. Well, property is bought in an existing lot a long time ago that doesn't have sidewalks. There's no requirement to build a sidewalk if there isn't one. So this would require it if it's a situation where you want a sidewalk to be there. So, for example, along a major road where there isn't currently a sidewalk. It also allows for waivers when building a sidewalk is infeasible or not needed. So currently, it's always required unless you get an alternative location plan approved by the Planning Commission. But there's some situations where it just doesn't make sense. Say there's a creek and it costs $1 million to cross to get from one side of the property to the other property. Well, maybe we can talk about that. You know, there's many situations where if your development is in the middle of nowhere and there's no sidewalk for miles to connect to, maybe it doesn't make sense still to build it quite yet. Those types of situations. It also provides for flexibility for encroachments and for widening for trails. The 5 foot width comes from, there's minimum requirements for the Americans with Disabilities Act. Requires that their sidewalks be 4 feet, but have a 5 foot passing lane every so often. So what Public Works proposed was, because it becomes very difficult to make sure that the ADA is met with sidewalks, let's just make them 5 feet, except for if you have a power pole or something like that. You can still lower it down to 4 feet if you have to. So generally it'll be 5 feet unless it needs to be lower, instead of 4 feet unless it needs to be wider. Kind of flips that on its head. So in summary, what this should do, it should assist with pedestrian mobility by hopefully providing sidewalks at the appropriate width in the appropriate locations. It would help. Currently, there are gaps in the sidewalk system. When there are gaps, it reduces the ability for people to walk, and it can make it impossible for someone who doesn't have a car but has mobility needs to be able to get around town. Gaps can also discourage walking, because if people feel that it's unsafe to be out trying to get anywhere. And then development and redevelopment could help close gaps that are currently in the system. The city is working very diligently to construct sidewalks where appropriate, but it'll be years before the gaps get closed. So this would, in the meantime, help to fill in some of those gaps. The Planning and Zoning Commission took a look at this, and they did recommend approval of the text amendment with a vote of 7-0.
Tom, 2 questions and a request. First question, on item 2C, sidewalks may be waived by planning and zoning for large lot subdivisions. Is the term large lot defined anywhere else?
Okay.
Does that have a definition, or that's sort of a figurative use of the term?
Yeah, that's one thing that I think probably could be addressed, and it is important to note that this is just on for discussion tonight. I didn't bring forward an ordinance, so that if there is any items or details that need to be clarified, it can be brought forward at the next meeting. And that is something that I saw after we put this out there, that there is some language in the current sidewalk standards that defines the 15,000 square foot lots and things like that. And I think that might be useful to clarify that.
Okay. Second question, on the issue of sidewalks 4 foot or 5 foot for that matter, sometimes people build these mailbox pillars, you know, they're rock or brick or whatever, you know, this wide, and a 4 foot sidewalk now becomes 2 foot.
Mm.
And I know of 2 cases in town where a resident has wheelchair-bound family member, and it's very frustrating to see that they then have to take that wheelchair and go in the grass because somebody built this pillar. How does that play into this issue of sidewalks?
The encroachment thing is number 6 in the proposed code under 42-233.1. Number 6 encroachments, it says very specifically, it can reduce it down to 4 feet. So no less than 4 feet, I should say.
So
And
what happens after somebody puts this pillar up?
It becomes an enforcement issue.
Okay, and enforcement issue by who? I mean, is that a codes violation, or?
It would be a codes violation, yes. It's in the zoning code, so I think it would fall under our area.
So there is a mechanism to deal with that?
Yes.
Okay. Now my request, again, for some of the newer council folks, the issue of building sidewalks when a subdivision is platted, I guess for lack of a better word, we allow the sidewalks to be built out, so to speak. So there's 20 lots in the subdivision, 2 sold, we expect sidewalk to be put in on those 2 houses. But then we're granting the developer the leeway, presumably, unless this is changing it, to then put the rest of sidewalks in as the rest of the lots are developed. So is that true, and can you explain that in greater detail?
I wouldn't say that's exactly true.
Okay.
Right now, when somebody does say a 20-lot subdivision, they'll turn in improvement plans. The improvement plans will show the roads and sidewalks and things like that. I think the expectation would be that you're building the road and the sidewalk. Now, there is a provision in the code that allows you to provide a performance guarantee dealing with public improvements. So if somebody were to enter into a performance guarantee to delay public improvements, then that may become an option.
Okay, so we allow the build-out, but with the provision that somebody's put a bond or cash up or something that it will be built.
To be completely honest, I think in the past that provision hasn't been utilized. This sort of been relying
That's why I'm
on
asking the question.
goodwill to ensure that the developer would put it in. But there is currently in the code provision that would keep them on the hook for ensuring the sidewalks are installed if they were to decide to defer it.
Okay, thank you. Questions from council?
I just wanted to throw out on top of what the mayor was saying here about the encroachment. Would it help for clarification, because it doesn't include mailboxes built in, or to either add that as before the et cetera, and then also maybe to it with no less than 4 consecutive feet, because honestly, someone could easily interpret that to mean 2 feet on each side.
Sure.
Put a mailbox in the middle. Well, that's what you got.
Creative mess.
Any other questions, Christine?
Yes, I want clarification on, in point number 1 point, it refers to, all streets shall be bound by curbs and gutters unless exempted.
Okay, so I believe you're referring to section 42-29-1, streets and alleys. Now that's a section that is currently in the code. You'll notice going through here, things that are underlined are things that are being proposed. Things that are strike through are things that are being proposed to be removed from the code. So something that's not underlined or strike through is things that are existing in the code.
Christine?
So I'm thinking of a situation in particular within the city limits where I think the subdivision, if you will, because I think it's multifamily, I've been there a couple of times. I think they do have a sidewalk within the subdivision. But from the subdivision, and a lot of students live in that neighborhood, and a friend of mine happens to live there, and she walks into work. And it's along E Highway there. She lives on Emily. And there is no sidewalk for her to walk once she leaves her neighborhood. And it's very dangerous. She's talked about how cars honk at her. She has to walk in the ditch sometimes to get past. So, you know, we're talking about subdivisions here.
So that's not a new subdivision, that's an older subdivision?
No, it's newer.
It's probably State Route E, right? You're
Yes.
talking about along State Route E?
Yeah.
It's a state road.
Yeah, that's on, yeah.
Hmm.
Still, highway E,
Yeah, we've been,
past the.
maybe Steve can update on that. Steve, you want to talk about the sidewalks on On Route E particularly?
Sorry.
Oop, let's come up.
Come up, we got an easy question for you.
So my question really was, we're requiring them within the subdivisions, is there then something that's stated to connect to other places?
What's the location we're talking about?
Emily Drive out State E,
Around East State Highway.
Yeah.
So we don't have jurisdiction over that.
but it's within the city limits,
But it's not our road, it's MoDOT's road.
so there won't be a sidewalk there.
Not unless we pay for it ourselves. There's no way to get the subdividers to do it. The city would have to do it. And we'd have to do it to MoDOT standards in that particular case. I mean, it's on our list of projects to try to fund. It's very expensive to me.
Yeah, it is a need, because there are a lot of students that live in that area,
Don't disagree with that at all.
and they're walking on that highway.
And we're kind of waiting to see how this whole University Drive thing falls out, because I think he's gonna come into play with that permit, and I'm not quite sure how that's all gonna fall out. But
Okay.
eventually, there'll be a sidewalk there. It's just gonna take us a while to get it funded.
And Steve, if I remember, some of the challenges with that is not all the property owners were willing to give up the right-of-way in order to allow the sidewalk in their
Property
property.
owners along there weren't as excited about building a sidewalk as we were, and they didn't want to give any right of way. So we have, the best thing that could happen out there is E-highway be improved with curb and gutters and sidewalk. And ultimately, that's really what needs to happen. And it may very well happen in the not too distant future, but yeah, it's very dangerous. I mean, I've looked at trying to get shoulders, there's just nothing I can get the state to go along with that's affordable.
Steve, similar to that, one of the questions that I get asked from time to time is, let's say you have a block and something was subdivided, built, and these two lots were built on, and a sidewalk goes in for 50 feet. And then here's a stretch of X amount of hundreds of feet with nothing. And then on the other end of the street, there's 2 or 3 or 4 homes and there's a sidewalk. And citizens say, well, that's pretty stupid. You're walking on a sidewalk, then you're telling the people to walk in the street and then go back on the sidewalk. So that's kind of the reason that I asked that question of Tom earlier.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. One is making sure we get it done with current developers, and as things develop, that we get those sidewalks in, those gaps are filled. There's a lot of sidewalks out there, though, that are past history and days gone by, and there's gaps. And as those roads come up for maintenance, part of our complete street strategy is to fill those
Is to
gaps.
do.
So when we.
But let's say on a new, I understand what's happened has happened, but let's take a new situation. That mechanism that Tom talks about that we can put in, let's say it's a bond or a cash deposit, whatever it is. How long do we go before we say, no, that doesn't make sense, people shouldn't go back into the street and back on the sidewalk? Do we build that sidewalk?
Right. That is a question that we need to solve. We have
No, I
not
asked
a
you the
good-
question.
Good answer for that at all.
Okay.
The best
so
answer is to make all the sidewalks go in on the street.
Is it on a timeline to decide, or you want somebody to officially ask you to make a recommendation? or
Well-
What are you saying?
We've been in discussions with we need to figure out a way to make sure we're keeping track of it. 'Cause we don't issue the building permits. We've been using the building permits as a way to get those sidewalks in, but if we're not signing off on the building permits, we're not seeing the sidewalks not going in, and then we miss them, so. The system we have is not working, and it's showing chinks in our armor.
So these proposed changes will tighten it up a bit?
Could.
These
Could or
don't-
would? I didn't hear you.
Well, I think we've got the authority just not to accept the bonds, that we would require the developers to put the sidewalks in, and as the streets are being built. Now, they're gonna resist that. You're gonna hear that coming back from the other end. And I'll be honest with you, we just haven't made the decision whether or not we wanna spend that political capital to make that happen. Right now, we're doing it on a case-by-case basis. As the building permits are issued, the sidewalks get built. And then I've got one developer that I know of that's gonna have to fill some gaps. She's agreed to do that at some point. But I've got other ones, we're still in negotiations with how we're gonna get those gaps filled.
Okay, thank you.
If, as for an example, what's just came up this evening with the first reading on Farrar, that side of the street, 18th Street, not sidewalked. Will that be worked into the plans for the development of that?
Farrar Drive?
Farrar
Yes,
Drive.
Farrar Drive was
And
actually
eight-
built by the city back in the early 70s, and there was no sidewalk ever put on it to begin with.
Yeah.
So whatever's there now, we've done over the years as part of our city improvements.
See, along 18th Street, there's no sidewalk on that side of 18th Street.
On one side of the street, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, the city put that in when they built it with one sidewalk on one side. It,
But a multi-resident structure would require sidewalks. Would that be right?
today, but it didn't always. And there was a time in our history where we weren't requiring any sidewalks at all. So we've got a lot of streets out there, and a lot of subdivisions that were built with no sidewalks. Many of the sidewalks that you see out there, we've done under our capital improvement program, where we've actually gone back in and put sidewalks in as part of our street network development.
And you've had to put in,
We've built way more sidewalks. The city of Rolla has built way more sidewalks than have ever been built by a developer. I mean, it's not even close. It's like.
and you had to manage water too, put those culverts in there.
Pardon me?
You had to, and in the Schuman neighborhood, where there were oftentimes not sidewalks, in the 80s, the rainwater ditches that run along
I'd
houses.
say the majority of the sidewalks we have in town have been built in the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm. We'll avoid that, right?
Any other questions for Steve or Tom?
I did want to say, you mentioned that property on Farrar we looked at today. Without this ordinance, they wouldn't be required to build any sidewalks with the development. With this ordinance, they would actually have to build sidewalks on all three sides because of the classification of the street and where on Missouri being a local street, it's saying they've got to be on the north side of the street. So just for an example.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to let you know, I'd like to pull that thread a little bit more on the state highways. I wasn't actually aware of that myself, so I want to pull the thread on that to see if the city can compel sidewalks to be built on the state highways when development occurs. So I'll know more about that next time.
Appreciate it. And I'm sure those people that live out there will also.
Okay, I'll circle back to council members. I'd like to officially open a public hearing regarding the proposed amendment to section 42-29. Is there anyone that would like to speak on the record for the proposed changes? Let's just say for or against, whatever comments that you would like to make. If not, we'll close the public hearing. Are there any other questions or information that council would like for the next meeting? If not, first reading, please.
We don't actually have an ordinance.
Oh,
This time we're
I'm
just having a
sorry.
discussion. I'll bring an ordinance next time.
Oh, so we get to talk about it two more times. Okay, moving on to old business. The first is an ordinance authorizing the general manager of Rolla Municipal Utilities to execute a real estate contract.
Thank you, Mayor. I think hopefully we'll get that on. Before you have a contract, I know the council's seen it before. We've made a few adjustments to it, but give you a little background on this piece of ground. This is a property that I'll kind of point out here. Rolla Municipal Utilities purchased this entire tract of ground in a neighboring piece across Highway O. And this is located at Lions Club Drive and Highway O. Lions Club Drive was there at the time. RMU purchased that in the very early 2000s, maybe in late 90s. Two parts. One is to acquire some ground for our service department. The second one was to help facilitate the purchase of the right-of-way for Lions Club Drive back in the early 2000s. Shortly after we purchased the ground, RMU went through a subdivision and zoning process on both of these grounds to carve off the Lions Club Drive right-of-way. And what it is, create two lots on the west side of this intersection. The board declared both of those parcels surplus in mid-2018. We went out for bid and solicitations for proposals for those two lots. We did receive a couple proposals, but they were deemed inadequate based on what we felt the value was for the property. Since then, we entered into negotiations with John Brown several months back, and kind of a long ongoing process. We had an original contract we brought to the city council several months ago that had, the counselor had some concerns about some of the condition of that contract. We, after that, we rezoned the property from, and we're talking specifically about Lot 2 of Municipal Acres 2, this portion right here. It was zoned C1. We rezoned it to R2, which would be compatible with future planned use that Mr. Brown had. We renegotiated the contract and have brought that forth to the council, hopefully for approval. I would point out that that this is now just a straight sale of this property. We expect Mr. Brown to come back with a subdivision for this lot to ensure that he meets his stormwater detention and parks requirements. RMU, which we also own, the property to the north side, we will be transferring control of that property over to the city of Rolla as part of the requirements to make sure he makes that. Lot 1, which is on the northwest corner, is heavily impacted by the floodplain, and so it'd be better suited for city use in the future.
Any questions for Rodney? If not, can we have the final reading?
An ordinance authorizing the general manager of Rolla Municipal Utilities to execute on behalf of the city of Rolla a certain contract for the sale of real estate with John Y. Brown.
Second.
Motion made in second, roll call vote.
Murphy,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Mush,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Eberly,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Crow,
Yes.
11 ayes.
Ordinance is approved. Next item is an ordinance setting sewer user rates. Darren?
So at the last meeting, we talked, staff have been reviewing the cost of treating extra strength sewer. Our costs were a little high, so staff's recommending lowering that cost a little bit. We recommend approval. Any questions? As I said last time, it affects one user in town.
Well, you think you're gonna get off this easy? This one?
Had a lot of questions last time, so.
Okay.
I'm done.
All right, any more questions for Darren?
Did you say you reduced the charge
Yes,
from the last time we looked at this?
it has been from 10 years ago.
Oh, never mind.
Yes.
Thank you.
The base charge or the surcharge?
Surcharge.
You reduced it.
Mhm.
I thought we raised it.
Well, the impact to Hartman is the industry that's really affected. Their rates are going to go up, but this was a change to the way our ordinance was described or defined.
We hadn't reviewed
Because we
these
had a
costs.
separate deal with Hartman.
Correct.
I got it. Thank you. There's no other questions? Final reading, please.
An ordinance amending certain sections of Chapter 35 of the General Ordinances of the City of Rolla, Missouri, known as the Code of City of Rolla, Missouri, relating to sewers and water.
Move the proposed ordinance pass.
Second.
Motion made in second, roll call vote.
Jordan,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Crow,
Yes.
Mush,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Eberly,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
11 ayes.
Next item is an ordinance approving the City of Rolla's fiscal 2019-2020 budget.
We've had a chance over the last few months to talk about the budget and the city's financial position. As we look at the 2020 budget, it's about a $42 million budget, but it's really overstated because of the sewer bonds that were approved by the voters, and that's factored in here. Most of those bonds will have been received in fiscal year 20, but really the expenditure is not going to be made until 2021 and actually over into 2022. So when I say that the budget's tight, I'm really only referring to the general fund. The budget itself is in good shape when you look at environmental services, you look at sewer, street capital improvements, even the park. The general fund continues to be the budget of the city's overall budget that continues to struggle. It's our largest fund that covers, as you know, everything public safety-wise, administrative, finance, engineering, all those kinds of miscellaneous divisions. So there are a lot of things that aren't in this budget that I think we all think were very important. It's what really led to the city council agreeing to go to the voters for the consideration of the use tax in November. We'll have to see how that plays out. We're not budgeting those dollars in here, but neither did we budget additional compensation for our police and firefighters and succession planning for our general offices, for equipment purchases that we need, lots of things that we have need out there that this budget unfortunately just doesn't provide at this time. So if we're successful at the November election on the use tax, we'll actually come back with a budget adjustment for the remainder of the year. But the budget does do some good things. One of the more unusual things, in addition to the sewer treatment plant, is the renovation work being done on runway 422. It's something that happens every 30 or 40 years at the airport. It's a $3 million project. We've already executed the 2 grants that will cover 95% grant funding for that, and we'll be awarding that contract tonight, along with some of the construction design phases. So happy to answer any questions about the budget. We've been over it a couple of times, and I think we all recognize it's just it's a struggle trying to get to all of these priorities met, and we'll just have to do the best we can this year until we see how the voters respond in November.
Any questions on the budget?
I got one. John, it's not so much on the budget. On the use tax, let's say it does pass, how quickly before we start collecting money and getting money so we can make the adjustment?
3 to 4 months.
3 to 4 months.
Yeah. So probably looking at something, maybe revenue starting in February, March. And then as that word gets out, and the state of Missouri is actually responsible for doing that collection, but you're talking about countries or companies all over the country to understand how that works. It takes a while for that to really take effect. So every month we'll see more and more of that pick up.
Because I think we put our public safety people at risk with this budget, more than they already are. And I hope we don't have to go to a few.
John, these companies are based outside Missouri, but have a nexus in Missouri. So when this gets implemented by the state, I'm assuming that it's not perfect on day one, that day one they've captured all of these. So some of these will take time until, I hate to say this way, but somebody gets caught. Is the state able to go back and get those taxes? Let's say a business in New York has a place in small town Missouri, and it's 8 months that goes by before somebody figures out they're supposed to collect this. Is there a mechanism that will get the 8 months?
There is. It's probably not perfect at the state level, but a good example. So for the TDD that went into effect, we find still businesses that weren't, they were all notified by the Department of Revenue, but they weren't collecting, and that does not relieve them of that obligation of having remitted. So they do go back and collect after the fact. When it becomes a business that's out of state, even if they've got a presence here, that can be hard to really impose that, but they have mechanisms to pursue it. The state's gonna have to make some decisions as to what kind of resources, how far do we go legally to collect it. So the bigger the presence in Missouri, the more the incentive is for the state of Missouri to go after it. A real small operator and some
Could slip through.
could slip through.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Any other questions on the budget? Gary?
Okay, just a quick statement to the public about our budget. I know for those of you who've been following for the last few months, even we've been dealing with all these things. We've had some budget workshops. I just want to mention that whether you shop online or whether you shop in town, you still use our streets, you still use our police and fire, and we're all very happy to have those things. And the use tax, I think we should all do our homework and try to learn as much about it as we can, because we have a lot of unfunded needs, and they're all, most of them are very related to our police and fire, our public safety, and that's why we've directed the funds toward public safety and all those needs that come from this use tax. So I just want to let the voters know, pay attention and try to learn as much as you can. This is going to be really important for the future of Rolla, that we're not letting this leak continue. And one other thing I just wanted to mention about the budget, and it's kind of a side thing. I know it's a hard thing for the city and the public to talk about because there's kind of contention on both sides. It's something that came way before myself, but I just want to be clear on two things in the way I present this. One is that I've heard a lot of people talk about the center and their worry about that. I want people to be very clear and understand that this money is going to public safety, not to the center, and that the budget for the center has nothing to do with the general fund. But at the same time, I want to respect voters and folks out there to understand that myself and I think others here on council understand that we are in a spot with the center where we really need to come up with a solution to the depletion of that fund, which is a separate fund. And so I'd like to be part of that conversation in the future, and I'd like the community to be part of that conversation in the future. And I don't know that now is necessarily the best time to discuss that, but I just want to also put that to staff and the mayor in terms of maybe getting an idea of when we can have that public discussion, because I think that's also going to make our voters and the public feel that we're listening to them on this particular issue, and that we're looking for new solutions as opposed to ones that we've kind of tried before. I know sometimes hiring and marketing folks or whatever, but it's true that we do have a mountain to climb. And so I just wanted to let voters know, from at least my perspective, those two things. Please educate yourself about the use tax, and we are working on, at least it's on my radar, and I feel like a lot of other folks here, that we want to make sure we're hearing folks on the center issues.
Any other questions or comments? If not, final reading.
An ordinance adopting an annual budget for the fiscal year beginning on October 1st, 2019, and appropriating funds pursuant thereto.
A motion to approve the fiscal budget.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Or we need a roll call for that. Roll call.
Henry,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
Murphy. Yes. Snyder,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Muse,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Eberly,
Yes.
Crow,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Ruder,
Yes.
11 A's.
Budget is approved. Moving on to new business. The first is an ordinance authorizing me to enter into a supplemental agreement with the Move Rolla Transportation District.
The MRTD, or the Move Rolla Transportation Development District, had entered into a supplemental agreement with